Welcome everybody to Kickstart your winter tree ID skills. My name is James from Woodland Classroom, based up in Northeast Wales. And welcome to everybody tonight. There's over 400 people in the room, which is fantastic. Loads of interest in finding out about how to identify winter trees. So I hope that's what you're all here for. So whether you're watching this live or you're watching it after the fact on YouTube, welcome. And this workshop's going to last about an hour long tonight. It may go a touch longer with the Q&A. We'll see how many questions there are, but the main workshop will be about an hour, so we should wrap up about 8:30 tonight. So let's talk a little bit about what you're going to learn tonight. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Bang, there's me doing a bit of bushcraft. But let's talk about what you will learn. So tonight, what this workshop's all about, it's all about identifying trees in the season of winter, when the leaves aren't on the tree, and we have to look closer at those details in order to identify them. So by the end of this workshop, I hope you're all going to have a solid grounding in how to identify trees in the season of winter, how to look at features which of course aren't the leaves on the tree, so the buds, the bark, overall tree form, the leaf litter, and any other winter signs that there are. I'm going to teach you 3 key principles to tree ID that you can use to help you get well on the road to identifying any tree and help whittle down the options. We're going to be identifying about 5 to 6 common tree species, but we're also going to touch on a lot more in conversation with a few different pictures. And we're also going to touch on recognizing trees from a distance as well, because most of the tree ID we do is close up, but it's interesting to start stepping back and looking for signs, and we're certainly going to touch on that. And also, I've got an exciting announcement to share with everybody where you can get a load more tree ID resources for something I've just launched. So I'll tell you all about that soon. Also, if you're watching on YouTube afterwards, feel free to put a comment on the video, and I'll do my best to get back to you as quick as I can if you've got a question on watching this workshop. Okay, and I hope we're all going to have a good time and learn some good stuff. I'm interested to hear about everybody's experience and get your questions later on. So a little bit about me. My name's James, and I'm a bushcraft instructor and forest school leader. I teach all ages of people about trees, woodlands, and our aim is to get people reconnected with nature. That's what we're all about. But trees is my particular love. That's what I am really passionate about. Trees and woodlands and forests are my thing. And yeah, and I've also not only teach people about trees, I've also managed woodland spaces as well. So I was the manager for the largest community woodland in Wales, about 300 acres of broadleafs and conifers. So I've got the direct experience as well of actually managing the trees and woodland spaces. Okay, so first thing we're going to talk about is why do we want to identify trees? Well, firstly, I probably think everybody in this room has a real interest in trees. That's why you're here, and we probably all love trees. So that's as good a reason as any to want to identify them. But also, trees are a really integral part of our landscape. They're part of our natural heritage. And you have ancient trees, you have beautiful specimens there, and the huge biodiversity value they have. And that's not only good for the health of the planet, but also increasingly now we understand it's good for our own health and well-being. Also, we have our hedgerows. So many trees in those, and hedgerows can, really special in Britain and really prized. And many people refer to it as the long forest. And that's such a valuable habitat as well, and a network that joins our woodland habitats as well. So why do we want to identify trees? Well, it can help us learn about all the associated wildlife and fungi that might be associated with a particular tree species, which could then, if we are woodland owners, woodland managers, and we're simply just using woodland space, can help us make decisions about how we're going to manage that space. And trees are just a fascinating subject. It's always humbling to be with a being that's much older than you and much bigger than you. It's like meeting an ancient elephant. You meet this old oak tree, and it's you just want to learn everything about it. Certainly I do anyway, and I think I'm probably in good company tonight. One of the first things we're going to cover, we're just going to go briefly over Latin names. Let's get that out the way straight away, because a lot of people can get a little bit intimidated by the idea of Latin names. But I've made a very easy way to break it down, which I'm going to share with you now. So Latin names are made up of 2 parts. It's called the binomial naming system. We have an example there. So a tree like a blackthorn can have a number of common names. So you see blackthorn, quickthorn, or sloe, some people call it, referring to the fruit. But its Latin name is Prunus spinosa. which tells us as a prunus it's part of the plum family. So there's that link to the plum trees and fruit trees that we know. Now, the good thing about a Latin name, of course, is that wherever we are, whether in Hungary or Portugal or in the UK, we know we're all talking about the same species, and that's useful to us. We're all referring to the same thing instead of using different common names or, of course, different languages. And the Latin name is broken into two parts. We have the genus first, and then we have the species name afterwards. I like to call it the family name and the Christian name because that's easy to remember. So if I'm James Kendall, with the Latin name, it's backwards, so it's Kendall James. That way around, that's how it would work. So prunus is the family and Spinoza is the species or Christian name. And in this case, if we understand the Latin, it can give us a little clue about the plant as well. And here we can see that prunus spinosa literally means spiny plum. And that's a pretty apt description of a black thorn. So we don't need to be experts in Latin names at this stage when we're beginning. You know, it's one of those things that comes with time. When we look in our tree ID guides, in our field guides, we start to take it in as we're looking at the pages of the book, and we start to recognize those names as we look at them again and again. And then we start to recognize patterns, and we start to see related species, trees that are in the same family. And that can help us start to make decisions about what it is when we're identifying it. You know, if you see a rowan and we start to learn the Latin name, you start to realize that's related to things like the white beam as well, and the wild service tree, and we start to realize that there are similar patterns with those trees. Okay, so folks, we're going to go on to the 3 key principles of tree identification, okay? These are 3 kind of hacks that they've come up with which are really going to help you get in the mindset to identify winter trees. And the first 3, these 3 principles are: number 1, tune in; number 2, begin with a branch; and number 3, alternate or opposite. Okay? So, principle number 1, let's explain that. Tuning in to your surroundings. Well, what does that really mean? Well, what I mean by that is that we should always be slowing down when we're starting to pay attention to nature. That's very important. So the first thing we think, we slow down, we stop, and we're looking at trees, and we think, okay, let's tune into our environment. Let's start to read the landscape. And we ask questions like, well, where are we? What's the history of the space I'm standing in? Is this a newly planted woodland? Am I in a conifer plantation? Am I in a town park or farmland? Or am I in a country estate like a National Trust property? And then when we start to tune into that and ask those questions, we can start to whittle down what we're possibly going to see. And with all these 3 methods, for me, it's very much a numbers game. So you're whittling down the options, so you can start eliminating different things from your inquiry until you come down to the few trees that it can be, and then you've got a lot less to look at rather than the large spectrum of trees it could be. So first of all, tuning in. So for instance, you know, if you're out in the countryside in farmland, you're unlikely to see a really exotic species like a giant sequoia sitting out there. But if you're on a National Trust property, they could well have all kinds of exotics which have been brought in the last few hundred years as part of the estate planting. Same if you're in an urban setting as well. You know, you can think about some trees which are better in more polluted atmospheres, trees like the sycamore or the London plane, some of the lime trees very much planted along streets as well. So we're starting to ask questions to eliminate what we're not going to see and what we are going to see. That's really important. And the more you do that, the better at it you'll get. That's really important. So slow down, tune into your surroundings. That's trick number 1. The next principle that I use is begin with a branch. So study a young, healthy branch first. Because when we look at a whole tree and want to identify it, and we don't know what it is, especially in winter when there's no leaves on it, it could be quite intimidating. Big old tree, what is it? Where do I start to look? So begin with a branch. Go straight over to the tree and take a branch that's healthy, it's got good buds on it, not a dead branch. Check also that the branch is connected to the tree you actually want to investigate. It's easily done, especially in a woodland. You can be looking at a branch, you've looked at a bit of bark on the tree, and then you follow it and you realize that branch is actually not connected to the tree you're wanting to look at. So follow it back and make sure it's connected. But everything you need to know about that tree to identify it with the majority of species is in the end of a healthy branch, about that much of the tree. That will tell you everything you need to know pretty much. Certainly with some trees, they have, for instance, a very distinctive feature elsewhere that you'll nail the tree straight away. Something like wild cherry, which has a very distinctive bark, but you don't even need to look at the twig. You just go, that's a wild cherry. And if you see a picture of that, you'll know what I'm talking about. But as a general rule, begin with a branch, narrow it down right to that small area, and then we can start looking at the details. And then all the information you need is in that branch. Alternate or opposite? And this is the first big question we ask about the tree itself. We're looking at the bud or the leaf arrangement. So do we have the buds in pairs or the leaves in pairs in summer along the twig, or are they alternately climbing up the branch? And this is what I mean by that. Have a look at this little image here, my very technical diagram. We have the alternate twig, where the buds or the little twigs and leaves are alternately climbing up the twig there, or we have opposites, where you've got them in pairs all the way along the twig. And this is really important because when you recognize this, it suddenly eliminates a load of species out of your inquiry. That's really important because there are only some species which have the buds and leaves in opposite pairs, and there are some which have them alternately. Most of the native and common trees in Britain, the buds are alternate on the branch. So if you're seeing them in pairs on a twig, so 2, 4, 6, it can only be one of about 5 to 8 things out in the countryside. If we're in town parks and where there's exotic planting, there's a few more options, but generally in this workshop, we're talking about our native common countryside trees. That's what we're talking about here. So let's have a look at some examples of that. Let's go back so I can show you exactly what I mean. So here we've got the bird cherry, Prunus padus. Not an easy tree to start with. This is one that could stump quite a few people, not one a lot of us see a lot of, although it is fairly common. But straight away, ask yourself, looking at that picture, without reading the text at the bottom, which gives it away, are they alternate buds or opposite buds? Okay, and they're alternate on the branch, aren't they? They're not in pairs. So straight away, any trees which are opposite budded, you can take away from the inquiry. And that's what I mean by that as well. We can see those there. And that's a really good example of some of the key features that we get on a tree there in winter. We've got buds, we've got those white spots called lenticels, which are kind of little glands on the bark. A lot of trees have that as well. This is elder, Sambucus nigra. And with the elder tree, as we can see, it's clearly in opposite pairs. There's a good pair right in the middle of the picture there. So if you're seeing that, it can only be one of a few things. So other trees which have their buds in opposite pairs, which are common, so elder, ash, sycamore, field maple, horse chestnut, they all have their buds in opposite pairs. So that's a really useful principle to look at there. Okay, here's another picture. Something different here. This is a sessile oak, Quercus petraea, and we can see here that the buds are alternate on the branch. But there's something else going on here too. Can you see the terminal buds, which are the buds at the end of the twig there? These are in clusters. And this is interesting because only a few tree species have buds in clusters on the end of the twig like that. Most of them, the buds are single as they appear on the twig. But the 2 oaks have them in clusters, and the wild cherry does this as well. I think hawthorn and blackthorn tend to do it, but they're very small buds, so they don't look the same. But if you think of wild cherry and the oaks, they have these little clusters of buds as well. So although that's alternate, the next thing I kind of look at is, oh, are there any clusters there? Is that giving away what this is? Okay, so something to look at there. Right, folks, so those are the kind of 3 principles I've got for the tree ID. So let's put this into practice. Let's have a look at a couple of common species, 2 that have similar names that people often get confused between, and that is the hawthorn and the blackthorn. Okay, 2 thorny shrubby trees which can look very similar, especially in winter. So let's break it down and compare the differences between the 2. And this will start to get us looking at buds, bark, and other signs as well. So this is blackthorn, Prunus spinosa, as we learned from our brief Latin lesson earlier. It has alternate buds, and actually you can see that on the thorns there, the little alternate buds sticking out. Now blackthorn, true to its name, has dark bark. It's quite a dark hued tree, almost a purplish colour to it, as you can see there. And when you look at a kind of a wall of blackthorn in a thicket, that purple colour does kind of shine out, but it's very dark, hence blackthorn. And it has large wicked thorns. You'll find those, as you can see in the picture there. Okay, let's have a quick look at some other shots of blackthorn. This is another trick you can do with blackthorn. If you scrape away the bark with your thumb, it will turn orange, the wood underneath, when it's exposed to the air. That's a good one. Now, this isn't a great one for differentiating between hawthorn and blackthorn, because for anyone who's cut any hawthorn, if you have a woodland or done any chainsaw work, you'll know that hawthorn can also turn orange when it's exposed to air after a while. But if you want to eliminate it from other trees, this is quite a little good trick to use, so it can turn orange. So that's something to look out for, something we can do ourselves. And also we can see there's quite a lot of moss on the bark there, covering the true colour. But when I think of blackthorn, this is what I think of this image here. It's a real thicket, an impenetrable barrier of thorns. And this is what blackthorn loves to do. It's got these long prominent thorns, and it grows by suckers. So these suckers are sent under the ground, and they come up and they spread like a thicket, and that spreads out from a woodland edge into fields, maybe aren't being mown regularly or grazed regularly. And you can see this on unkempt field edges, the blackthorn creeping in. And this is just natural succession taking place, where land is slowly being allowed to turn into scrub and then eventually to woodland. Now, blackthorns can spread by suckers, whereas hawthorn doesn't. It doesn't do that. So if you're seeing a thicket like this that's spreading and you're seeing smaller trees to the edge, it's more likely blackthorn than hawthorn for sure. So that's something to look out for. Here we go. Here's a close-up of the buds of the blackthorn. Now, I think we've already seen the best key features of the blackthorn. These buds are so small, as you can see, compared to my hand there. The size of them is distinctive. There's not many trees that have such small buds. You could use that as a defining feature. But really, you know, looking at those thorns and the colour of the bark and that thicket growth, that's what I go to first. But there's just a really good example of tiny buds, and they are in clusters. And if you look carefully, you can see they are alternate, but all of them are in clusters there. But the buds of hawthorn are small as well. So it's not the buds I would turn to identify between the two species. Okay? There's something else you can look for in winter as well. This little shot taken in the studio. Here's some blackthorn twigs with the characteristic sloe, which is the fruit of the blackthorn. And shriveled up in winter, you can see a rotten one on the top twig there, and that's something you can find. And the fruit of the hawthorn, as we see, is very different. But the sloes are those small black purplish fruits, which really are well past their best now. They're all falling off the tree with the frost that we've got now. But in winter, you can still see the odd one hanging on, and that's a good thing to look out for. Okay. Blackthorn again, more of that, with its very kind of light, delicate branches, quite thin and spindly. Let's move on to hawthorn now. Hawthorn, similar name, and the thing is with hawthorn and blackthorn, they're pretty much always found side by side. Kind of 60 to about 80% of hedgerows are made up of these trees, so they're intertwined. But look how different the bark is on this mature hawthorn here. It's much more craggy, much more of a greyish brown colour. There's a bit of green on there, which is moss, so we ignore that, but very different character to the blackthorn bark. And then here's the spines of the hawthorn. Generally, they're smaller than the blackthorn. Not always the case, but typically, if you look across the whole tree, the blackthorn spines will be larger than the hawthorn spines, but a little bit of a difference there. And then this is something that I'd look out for, the leaf litter of the hawthorn. With blackthorn, the leaves are just small little ovals, so nothing too distinctive there. There's quite a few other trees which have similar leaves, but the hawthorn has very distinctive leaves, and in winter, we can still find them on the floor. They look a little bit like miniature oak leaves. They're very strongly lobed, as you can see, and split into kind of 3 sections there. So if you're finding a lot of that on the floor, or you might even find one still attached to a twig, of course, if it's attached, that's fantastic, because you know it definitely belongs to the tree, and it hasn't just blown in from some other tree. And that's a really key sign, because the blackthorn leaves don't look anything like that. They're just small little ovals, as I said earlier. So really distinctive. And then the last thing with the hawthorn, you might get the odd berry still hanging on. Certainly now in early winter, there's lots of hawthorn berries still around. But by the time we come around to February, there's a lot less on the branches as the birds have had them all. So particularly field fares like these to eat. But they are very different from the sloes, as we can see. They're smaller and they're that rich red colour. Very good for your heart as well. Okay, folks, that's hawthorn and blackthorn, two that people get confused quite often. Okay, let's go through 3 trees to look out for in winter, which have very distinctive features, some from a distance, some close up. And these are common trees which you can go out on a walk tomorrow and see for yourself and look for these features. Okay, tree number 1, the alder. The alder loves riversides and wetlands. So alongside a riverbank, you're often going to find this along with willows. And have a look at those buds on the left and how bright purple they are. That's really distinctive, and you can spot that really easily. If you see those bright purple buds like that, beautiful kind of velvet feel to them, it's alder. On the right there, we have the female flowers, which come out kind of later in the winter, but they're also kind of a pink-purple colour. So if you're seeing the purple colours there, you've got alder, and that really does stand out, and it's something you'll really notice, hopefully, next time you take a countryside walk. So look out for that with alder. Here's another one. Are the buds on this one alternate or opposite? They're opposite, aren't they? So it's one of only a few species. People might know what this one is. This is the ash tree, so Fraxinus excelsior. And with this one, what I think of is those very distinctive kind of devil's pitchforks on the tops of the tree there. Those, you get one that's longer and 2 that are shorter on either side, just like we see here. And if you think of that with your 3 fingers held up, or that devil's pitchfork, that's what I look for in ash. Also, ash are one of the first trees to lose their leaves in autumn, so you're going to see bare ash trees sooner than you will other species. Of course, there's also ash dieback, which is causing them to die back and lose their leaves. So that's another reason why you might see a lot more of the bare trees with the ash. So something to look out for. Try and look for that in the tops of canopies of trees tomorrow when you're out and about. Look for those 3 prongs of the ash tree. There's something else in the ash tree that you can see at this time of year though, and that's the fruit of the ash, what are known as keys. And they come in these heavy bunches of keys hanging down off the branch. And you can see here, there's a shot from a distance. You can really notice those bunches in the silhouette of the tree. And as you're driving around, obviously look at the road, but do check out the ash trees along the roadside. You'll see these bunches of keys heavily laden in a lot of the ash trees. And that can tell you it's an ash straight away. No leaves and all these heavy bunches of keys. It's ash. And there they are close up. So a couple of things to look out for. Once you spot this, you'll see it everywhere. And you'll be able to spot an ash tree from a mile off. Okay. Last one of these 3 is the beech. And when a lot of people think of beech trees, they think of this smooth grey bark. And it keeps that smooth grey bark right into maturity. So that's really a key feature. And to be honest, that's the number 1 key feature I would use for identifying beech, because it is so distinctive. Most other trees crack up. You can see one fissure going vertically down the tree there, but generally they are smooth still. But the thing about the beech is, it's a tree that you can identify with your eyes closed. And this is where you can really show off to friends next time you're on a walk. It has to be a mature tree, but what you're going to do is approach the tree, have your eyes closed, and you're just going to start walking. And your boots are going to start crunching. You're going to hear this crunch and you're going to feel it under your shoes. And you've got all of this littering all over the floor. The beech mast. And the mast are the shells that, the cases that encase the nutshells for the beech nuts. And these are littered under mature beech trees, and they pile up year on year. So you often get like 2 or 3 years beech mast under the tree there. Very distinctive, very crunchy and distinctive under your feet. And you can show off by saying, I know what this tree is, without even looking at it. There they are close up. And you can still often find quite a lot of the nutshells that you can see there from inside the mast itself. But most of the nuts that you find now will be empty inside, because if they had a good nut, an animal would probably have snaffled them away already. So a lot of them, you'll open them up and there's nothing inside. But if you do find one that's good, you can eat it. So it's good stuff. So there's some things to look out for. And of course, looking at the beech mast there, we're starting to think about looking under the tree as well and looking at what's under there. But we have to be a little bit careful when looking under trees and looking at leaf litter, because of course, if you're in a woodland, leaf litter could have blown in from all kinds of places. The best time that leaf litter works is when a tree is isolated. So a tree in the middle of the field, you know the leaf litter belongs to that tree. Or if you're already sure what the tree is, pretty sure, and you just want that extra confirmation, you're thinking, okay, there's a lot of this under here, this shaped leaf, that's what I'm looking at. So that's what I'd say to look out for there. Let's go on to field maple, Acer campestre. This is a common tree, common hedgerow tree. You also get it along scrubland as well. It's our only native maple. The sycamore is not a native. But maple trees, of course, famous in New England and Canada for the beautiful displays of colour we get. But we don't have any native maple trees that go these beautiful scarlet reds. But the field maple does go a nice yellow in autumn, and certainly a few weeks ago we were having that display, but now this is more likely what you're going to see. So let's ask those questions. Are they opposite or alternate? And they're opposite, aren't they? All maples, acers, are opposite paired. Think of the Canadian flag. That's a maple leaf. It's a leaf that they call palmate because it's like an open palm, and it has these kind of 5 points on it, like the Canadian maple leaf, which it's related to. The other thing, have a look at the seeds there, the little helicopters that we know from sycamore. The difference with the wings there is that they are straight. They're not at 45 degrees to each other. And typically, field maple seeds are straight out to each other at 90 degrees rather than at kind of a 45-degree angle hanging down like this that you get with sycamore. Typically, that's what you see. And also the field maple leaves are a lot smaller than sycamore, as we'll see. Here's something that's really interesting on field maple, getting to look at the bark. This is really distinctive. It's what I call a crocodile's back. And hopefully you can see what I mean by looking at the picture there. This is a kind of semi-mature branch of the field maple there. And you can see these ridges, which are raised up. They're actually quite squashy if you dig your thumb into them. There's not a lot of strength to them. But think of a crocodile's back. And if you're seeing that feature there, you've got field maple. So look out for that. And actually, there it is again on a more mature trunk. You don't get it on all the field maples, but if you look across the whole tree, you're going to find it somewhere. Some of them have lots of this, some of it have a little bit, but it's one of the things you can add to your arsenal to use to help identify the tree. So look out for that distinctive feature. Okay, let's get another photo here. Here's the leaf litter on the floor, very distinctive maple leaf shape. And what we can see from this one is that there's a bit of variety in the shape as well, smaller and larger leaves. There's even a leaf there that has just 3 lobes as opposed to the 5. So look out for that. And this is where we don't just take one leaf, we have a look at a few and look at them all and see what's going on to get a good wide picture of the tree. More field maple, we'll skip through that. More opposite pairs there. Let's have a look at this one here. We've got 3 maples. These are the 3 most common maples you'll find in the woods and out and about in the countryside, and especially on roadside planting as well. We have field maple at the bottom. You can see how small that is compared to the sycamore, which is also a maple, Acer pseudoplatanus. That's a sycamore on the left, much larger leaf, often with the black spots. That's sycamore, if you see that. Actually, the black spots are not a sign of bad air quality. They're actually a sign of good air quality. So that's interesting. I wonder if anyone knows what the leaf on the right is. Definitely not a native maple, but probably the other most commonly planted maple. It's the Norway maple. And look how jagged and more dramatic the edges of the leaf are. They're much more pointed and jagged compared to your field maple and sycamore there. So that's something really interesting to look out for. If you're seeing very jagged maple leaves, that's not one of ours. The sycamore isn't native either, but it's naturalized. It's been here for a good few hundred years. So it's kind of found its place in the countryside, whereas the Norway maple is a much more recent introduction. Okay, that's our field maple. Let's go back. Oak trees, along with holly, is probably one of the trees that almost everybody can identify and say, it's an oak tree. We know the leaf, symbol of the National Trust. The oak leaf is such an iconic shape, we all know it. But I want to give you a few little tips to look closer at the oak, because we have 2 native oaks in this country. We have the peduncular oak and we have the sessile oak. The peduncular oak is also known as the English oak, so 2 common names there. And that is mostly found, kind of southern central England, whereas the sessile oak is more northwest and uplands. That is a general rule. It's not exclusive. There's no barrier or boundary. And of course, with planting, people have planted the 2 species all over the place. Generally, Sessile oak prefers those kind of uplands, westerly regions, and the peduncular oak or English oak is more central and southern England. But certainly we have English oak around here in northeast Wales where I am, so you get both. But let's have a little look closer at oaks and see the difference between the two, as well as some other features. Here we go. First of all, when we think of oak, we think of probably the picture that comes to our minds a mature, gnarled tree, very fissured, grey-brown bark with deep ridges. But here's a young oak, and I wanted to put this picture in because it really demonstrates how we shouldn't come to assumptions straight away. This young oak has pretty smooth bark, actually, as most young trees do, and it's got quite a silvery sheen to it as well. There's none of that grey, dark, craggy characteristics coming in yet. So this is where you could look at the bark and dismiss it and think, that's not an oak. So again, begin with a branch, go to the branch and have a look what's going on there, and that should tell you that you've got an oak. This one here is interesting because, as it says here, young trees, young oak trees, often hang on to their dead leaves in winter. Young beech trees do this as well. So if you see a tree in winter, and this is, of course, you can use this from a distance, and it's still got a lot of its leaves on, and it's a young tree, and those leaves are dead, of course, brown, it's either going to be an oak tree or a beech tree. So straight away you can narrow it down to two there. And then as you get closer, you're soon going to answer the question because you'll see the details. But look out for that. Older trees don't do this. They lose their leaves. When they're young, they hang on to them. Okay, here we're going to start to look at the two differences between our two oak trees, the peduncular oak and the sessile oak. So firstly, Quercus robur, our peduncular oak. Let's have a look there. We've got the classic leaves, so we can see a bit of that shape there. We've got the clusters of buds at the end, the terminal end of the branch, and the buds are alternate, as they are with all oaks. So what can we see else there as well that could help us? Have a look at the acorn cups. Can you see that they're on stalks? That's really key. The acorn cups are on long stalks with this tree, the peduncular oak. Also, the leaves don't really have a leaf stalk. They're pretty much very close to the branch. If there is a leaf stalk, it's very short. Okay, let's go to the next picture. Here's one of those leaf stalks up close, and I think of them as like a little fairy pipe, where a little fairy would stick it to a smoker pipe while sat under an oak tree. That's a good way of remembering it. So that's really obvious there. We've got the acorn on a stalk. But have a look here. Here's some closer looks of the peduncular oak, more acorn cups on stalks, and the very wobbly leaf there that we've got. The buds themselves, kind of a tan brown colour, not much to help us there, but it's those acorn stalks and the very short stalks on the leaf. You can see it there and there. There's very short stalks. This is where we're really looking closer because now we have the sessile oak, Quercus petraea. Have a look at the difference. Have a look at the acorn cups on the left of the picture there. They're in clusters. They're not always in clusters on the sessile oak, but often they are together like that. And there's no stalk coming off them. The acorns are right on the branch without stalk. And sessile oak, the word sessile means stalkless, and it's referring to the acorns. The acorns don't have stalks on the cups. However, the leaves do have stalks, so it's the opposite way round. As we can see there, you can actually see some of the stalks on the leaves there. I think we have a closer picture. There we go. Really close picture of the sessile oak. Look at the longer stalks between the twig and the bottom of the leaf, the base of the leaf there. And also you can see right there an acorn cup right on the branch, and there's one behind it too. There's no stalk there. Of course, the acorns themselves are fallen off, but we don't need them to identify it. Also, you can look on the ground to see where they're fallen. That's a difference between the two. In terms of biodiversity or longevity, their lifespan or how we would manage them in the woodland, they are the same. They're both as valuable to wildlife as the other. They've both got a good lifespan if they're allowed to live to 900, maybe more years. They say an oak takes 300 years to live. So 300 years to grow, 300 years to live and thrive, and 300 years to die. And that's why we get such magnificent oaks in this country. And actually, in Britain, we have more veteran and ancient oaks than anywhere else in Europe, which is pretty cool, so we should look after them. Just here, we've got the comparison between our two oaks here, looking closely. Sessile on the left, peduncular on the right. Look at the difference between the leaf shapes. The peduncular oak on the right, much larger lobes, less lobes. The leaf on the left, sessile oak, smaller lobes and more of them. What I will say about this is that this is typical, not absolute. I've certainly seen sessile oak leaves which have less lobes than this. So although this is a good guide, this comparison between the two, and that's typically what you see, it's not always what you see. So go back to that rule I said. Peduncular oak has acorns on stalks and no leaf stalk. Sessile oak, no acorn stalk, but leaf stalks. Okay, that's the difference between those two. So we've learned a little bit about our oaks in detail, something you may not have thought before. So next time you buy an oak tree, when you walk tomorrow, have a little look and find out, is it a peduncular or a sessile oak? Okay, folks, let's have a little look at trees from a distance, because my principle is begin with a branch, get up close, eliminate your inquiry down to one close area and ask your questions of that healthy branch. But once we're confident with that and we're really starting to get to know our trees, we can start to step back and take in that bigger picture. And if we're tuned into our environment using principle 1, we're going to start to recognize certain shapes that we see. And we've already seen the ash with its bunches of keys heavy in the canopy with no leaves on now, which I'm sure you're all going to spot tomorrow. So look out for that. But let's look out for some other things that we might see from some common trees that we can recognize. No clues for guessing what this is because I've written it on the bottom of the picture. This is birch. So silver birch or downy birch, one of them. But have a look at this. As we approach the tree, we're seeing what look like birds' nests in the tree. These are called witches' brooms, and they're caused by a fungus, which causes this kind of dense growth to burst out. Doesn't really kind of harm the tree, but it's just a reaction to the fungus. And they look like lots of birds' nests dotted within the silhouette of the tree. So when you look at birches, look out for this because it's the only tree that really has these commonly. So this is something really good we can look out for, and we can spot these from quite a way off as well. It's a really good sign to look out for. Looking at birch again though, I deliberately stayed away from the distinctive silver bark that we know, that white and black bark that immediately is going to tell us we've got a birch tree. Of course, that's a #1 thing to look out for. But we're looking deeper. And as we approach a tree, or the stand of trees here, what do we see? And what we have here is a stand of birch in the foreground. There's actually birch at the back. But look at the colour of the twigs. They're purple. And I've not done any colour correction here. This is as it appears. If you look at a bank of birch, you'll start to see this purple colour. And when you look very close at a birch twig, you'll see that the bark does have a purple hue to it. And if you're seeing this purple hue, you've got birch. And that's a really good way of recognising that from a distance. And again, birch are a pioneer tree. A little bit like the blackthorn, they like to spread into new territory. Not by suckers, but they spread by wind dispersal with the very small seeds that spread on the wind and colonise new areas. But if you look on hillsides, in Wales we have a lot of hills, of course, and you can see the birch at the edge of the woodland. You can see the odd birches creeping up the hill with their purple canopies. And that's something to really look out for. So even on a dark day when you can't make out that white birch bark, or even on young trees where the bark hasn't actually gone white yet, it starts off a kind of browny reddish colour, look out for this purple bank of colour and you can spot the birch trees straight off. Let's talk about tree form. And here we have a beautiful oak tree. When I think of the shape of a tree, and I think of an oak tree, that's what comes to my mind. And I think if we asked a kid to draw a picture of a tree, they probably either draw a Christmas tree, especially now, or they draw your lollipop stick with your green fluffy cloud on it, which is pretty much the shape of an oak tree. So I think of how a child would draw a tree, and that's an oak. With an oak, if it's left to its own devices and it's got enough light and space, it would typically form this shape here. It will be as wide as it is tall. So you can almost kind of draw a circle around it. Whereas a lot of other trees like elm or sycamores, they can be a bit taller. Beech can certainly reach up as well, although they can spread out. But this one here, the oak tree, generally as wide as it is tall. You can draw a circle around it there. But tree form is an interesting thing because we have to be careful about how we use it, because tree form can vary so much depending on the forces that are on a tree. So you might have trees in a dense area that have been forced upwards to get to the light, You might have trees at the edge of a woodland, which are putting on a lot of growth towards the edge because that's where it reaches the sun, or it can get space away from maybe some conifers that are next to it. Trees in a hedge are, of course, dense together and they're clipped every year. So that's going to form the shape as well and have an influence. So tree form is only really useful when you've got a lone tree sitting on its own, doing its own thing. That's where you can start to look at the shape. Other than that, you've got so many different forces on it. The tree form, it can be a wary one to use. A bit with leaf litter, it's not always the first one you go to. We did have one more. There we go, the hawthorn. So we've got a hawthorn here. We saw the berries earlier, but particularly in early and midwinter, as you approach a tree, you're seeing the red peppered all over the tree there, and I hope you can see that clearly. And that's going to tell you you've got a hawthorn. The only other tree that has a lot of red berries, well, the only two other trees that have red berries, of course, the holly. That should have leaves on it, so it's definitely not holly. And the rowan. But the rowan berries have all gone. They've all been eaten by now, so they're not hanging around. Even by mid-autumn, a lot of them have been snaffled away by birds already. Whereas the hawthorn berries hang on. So if you're seeing this bank of red berries, as you start to approach a tree, you can already be pretty confident you've got a hawthorn. Okay, folks. Right. Not long to go. Let's crack on. Okay. So lots of top tips there on trees. Hopefully thinking from distance, close up, different things we can be looking at there. Okay, folks. So I mentioned as well that I've got an exciting announcement about stuff that's going on in the world of trees. For all of us that love trees, I've been working away busily on creating an online tree ID course. It's called Kickstart Your Tree ID Skills. And I think there's some people who are actually already on that course in this workshop tonight, so welcome to you. And I'm going to take a few minutes just to tell you about this course before we do our question and answer, and then start to dive into all the questions you might have about what you've seen and anything else that you have about winter trees that you want to know. And the great news is it's totally free. It doesn't cost a penny to do. I've created it and it covers some of the stuff that's been in the course tonight. There's a lot of other stuff on there as well. And basically it will build your confidence in identifying trees in winter. It's taught through video, through picture galleries as well. There are quizzes on there as well for each season. And what I've done is built this course, which is 3 of our native trees through all 4 seasons. So you can start it and you'll see winter, spring, summer and autumn and the changes of that tree throughout the year and the different things we look out for. And there are some really good resources on there as well that you can use. So these are my tree ID cheat sheets that I've created. And I've got some hard copies here that I've printed off for you guys to see. There's ash and field maple in spring. You can see some previews there. These can be downloaded to a phone, or you can print them off as a hard copy. If anybody works in education and wants to use them with a group of kids or anything, you can use those. And these basically pick the top key features that you'll find of that species at that time of year. So the 4 things you need to look out to know it's hazel in spring. And I've done close-up pictures of there, and also they list similar species as well that you can find. So these are really handy resources. You can have it on your phone or print out physical copies, and you get all of those for the 3 trees in all 4 seasons on the course as well. And there are photo galleries, lots of photos of the trees at different times of the year, concentrating on different aspects. We can see some catkins there, we can see seeds, flowers in spring, dead leaves in winter, bark detail, that's all there as well. And also I've taken a lot of photos in studio as well, where we can isolate the leaves, for instance. We can see them in summer and in winter here, and some of the twigs, and really get the detail and know what we're looking for. So the course is a really comprehensive introduction to tree identification, and that's available now. And I really hope that you guys sign up to that. So I'm very proud of creating it. Yeah, really pleased with it. It's called Kickstart Your Tree ID Skills, and I think so. Do sign up to that. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment, and if you like that, there's some more news, because on Monday next week I'm going to launch the complete Tree ID course, which is up to 30 species of trees. It's a much bigger project. So if you'll excuse the pun, with these courses, I'm going to help you see the trees from the wood. Okay, so there we go. And I really hope you get a lot out of that. So if you get on the course, drop me a line, let me know how it goes, leave a comment, and yeah, interact with the students there. It'd be really great to see you all on that. And as I say, it doesn't cost you a bean, it's free. Okay, And I really hope it'll help you get on your journey to becoming a tree expert yourself and building your confidence and skills when you're out. And it's perfect for anyone who walks out in the countryside and says, I love trees, but I really don't know what they are. I want to get a lot better. So I hope this, along with this workshop, will answer those questions for you. Okay, folks, it's about time we did some open Q&As and did some questions. So what we're going to do, we're going to dive into the chat room now and see what questions people have got about winter trees, anything that we've covered in the session now, or anything that you've got about native trees. We're not really covering kind of cultivated garden varieties here because the numbers would go into the hundreds. So we're talking about our native trees out in the countryside, really. Okay, so that's interesting. Somebody, I missed the name, but they said, I saw a fir tree recently that was in the process of shedding its leaves. What's going on there? I suspect what you saw was a larch. If it is a fir tree, and you know that for sure, do let me know, because it might be another reason what I'm about to say. But the only conifer that sheds its leaves in winter is the larch tree. It's not a native, but it's very commonly planted here in Britain, especially in forestry plantations and big blocks. And in autumn, you'll see the needles all start to go golden, a lovely yellow colour, and that's something you can spot from a distance. You see this block of yellow conifer. It can only be the larch. And then in winter, they all drop their needles. So if you're seeing a conifer without any needles in winter, it's either dead or it's a larch. So it's one of those two things. So I suspect what you saw was a larch. Lynn asks, I'm never sure about elms. What is there to look for? Elms is an interesting one. When people hear the word elm, they usually think of Dutch elm disease, which ravaged the elms back in the kind of 70s and 80s. Much like ash dieback is doing to our ash now. But wych elm is pretty common where I am. I see a lot of it about. What we don't see is a lot of large mature elms, because what happens is with the elms, when they reach a certain age, that's when the beetle flies onto the tree, and it's the beetle that carries the Dutch elm disease. And there are two schools of thought with this. One is as to why the beetle only goes to a certain age of tree when it reaches certain maturity. I think it's around the 30-year mark, I think. And one of the thoughts is because the beetle flies at a certain height, and when the elm is at that height, it can find them. And the other thought is that's when the bark starts to crack up, and that's when the beetle can get in and lay its eggs. So what we do see is a lot of younger, kind of scrubby, multi-stemmed elm trees which have died back and regrown, because they will die with disease, but they regrow again. So they just go through this cycle a lot. But it's the English elm that was really hit. But with elm trees, one thing to look out for, just a couple of weeks ago, big, large yellow leaves, especially with the wych elm, massive leaves, about so big, and bright banana yellow with a serrated edge. That's really key to look out for. And the other thing is, the leaves are very uniform along the twig. You see them in the hedge and you think, am I looking at hazel leaves? Because they look like large hazel leaves, but actually they're elm, and they're very uniform, very flat along the same plane along the branch. But look for that. But very large leaves, and yeah, and also alternate buds on the elm tree as well, pointed buds. Which trees have round leaves? Somebody has asked. Okay, so if we're talking about winter tree idea, we're looking for leaves fall on the floor. Round leaves, I would say, first of all, the hazel has roundish leaves, and you might still find some of the dead leaves on the floor. The aspen, which is one of the poplars, has very round leaves as well. So that's something to look out for. So the aspen and the hazel, very roundish leaves, look out for those two. That's what I would say with those. So Mia asks, what are the black spots on sycamore leaves? Okay, that's called black tar spot. And as I mentioned earlier, it's actually a sign of good air quality, not bad air quality. And this is a little fungus that kind of gets onto the leaf there, and it lives quite happily with the sycamore. Yes, it stops the leaf from photosynthesizing so much because it takes away some of the green surface, but it doesn't kill the tree. And certainly black spot doesn't kill off a sycamore tree. It learns to live with it. Maybe having a bit of a skin condition, we could say, on the sycamore, but it just lives on the sycamore tree, and that's great for us as identifiers because it doesn't happen with the field maple or the Norway maple. So if we've got the black spots, black tar spot, we know it's a sycamore. Let's have a quick look. Any other questions? Edible berries, which trees? Okay, let's talk about winter. Holly berries, don't eat them. Don't eat holly berries. Don't eat yew berries. They are deadly poisonous. We don't want to be eating those. The seeds are deadly poisonous. But edible berries, hawthorn. We saw them earlier, those little kind of dark red berries. They are perfectly edible. They are very tasteless, though. They have quite a large stone in the middle, so don't chomp down on it because you're going to get your teeth there, but just eat it softly. And there's a little bit of flesh around there. And although they don't taste very much, they're very good for you. They're very good for your heart. So there's something you can actually snack on. So they're a good thing to be nibbling about on there, just to make sure you haven't got a holly berry, but that should be no problem for you at all now you've done this workshop. But hawthorn is definitely a berry that used to be collected a lot in abundance and used mashed in with other berries or other fruit like apple to make things like fruit leathers or jams and that kind of thing, as jellies, added in with things that have more taste. But yeah, hawthorn berries are a good one you can eat. You can eat sloes from the blackthorn earlier in the season, but they are very sour. Some people like them, but of course sloes are famous for sloe gin, which is where you of course add alcohol and a lot more sugar. Okay, we've just got 5 minutes left. Let's see, can I grow a hawthorn in a pot? Yeah, you can grow any tree in a pot. Just look after it. If it looks unhappy, maybe think about moving it. Is it getting enough water? Is it getting enough light? But yeah, collecting seeds, like collecting the hawthorn seeds, munch the berry, and then put some seeds in pots and start to grow your own forest. Why not? Great project to do. And we've got a lot of native tree species in pots ourselves in the garden, because one day we hope to have a bit of land and grow our own woodland. So fingers crossed on that one. Okay, which wood to burn on a fire? Forest school leader asks that. So yeah, they say there's an old wives' tale that said if you burn elder, it's meant to invite the devil. And that's interesting because there is a lot of kind of myths and legends around not burning elder. And actually, elder is terrible firewood. It doesn't burn well at all. It's got a soft pith in the middle. It doesn't grow to any large size. It's got a very kind of corky bark. It's terrible firewood. So don't even bother burning it as firewood. It's far better for the berries and the flowers, not only for us for wild food, but for pollinating insects and for all the birds who want to eat those berries. And it's great as a craft wood as well. You can make whistles and little projects out of it, as you'll know if you're a forest school leader. But don't burn elder as firewood. Not good stuff to burn at all. Some of the best firewood, things like ash, because it has a slightly lower moisture content, so it burns a little greener. But any good hardwood, beech, oak, that kind of thing, of course, burns very well too. Birch burns very bright, so it burns quite quickly, but with a bright flame, but it grows fairly fast as well, so it's a good one to burn. And of course, the birch bark from oak is great for fire lighting too. So somebody says, Steph asks, I have a young beech in the garden and it doesn't have any nuts. The leaves are still on the tree, but they are orange. Okay, the bark is dark and smooth. Could it be beech? Yes. Be aware though, if it's in your garden, it could well be a cultivar. This is where we start to get into the world of horticulture, which is where I start to walk away. But of course, we have things like Fagus sylvatica purpurea, the copper beech. This is a cultivar with its copper leaves. We all have probably seen it out in the countryside. That's a very famous example of a cultivar. But yes, it sounds like it is a beech. It's holding on to its brown leaves, which are dead. But as you were saying, it doesn't have any nuts. If it's a mature tree, I would say it's probably just having an off year. Beech don't produce nuts every year all the time. They do have what's known as a mast year. Every kind of 7 to 10 years, it seems to be, they throw out a lot of mast, which contain the nuts. And this is all dependent on the season before. But certainly this year in my local area, the beech nuts weren't very good at all. Large trees weren't putting out a lot of nuts, and I only managed to gather a few for wild food. So whereas last year I got a lot more. So you get good years and bad years for beech trees. If it's a young beech tree, it's just not old enough to produce the nuts yet. Okay, key points to tell the difference between Hazel and Hornbeam from Emma Weller. This will be our last question for now. So Hazel and Hornbeam. Hornbeam, typically a large tree or clipped into a formal hedgerow, much like you get with beech. Hornbeam looks very like beech. They're very similar. If you do the full course, which you'll find out about in emails, you can see the difference between the Hornbeam, beech, and the Hazel. But in terms of Hazel and Hornbeam, Hazel have rounder leaves, whereas Hornbeam leaves are narrower. In winter, Hazel is much more of a shrub, typically growing with a lot of multi-stems from the ground, what they call a stool, and it has hairy twigs. think of hairy hazel. If you remember that rhyme, hairy hazel, and you see hairy twigs with kind of bristles, think of like bristles on a boar or a pig. That's hairy hazel. Look out for that. And the rounder leaves with a serrated edge. Hornbeam doesn't have those hairy twigs, and typically it's either found as a large stately tree or clipped into a hedgerow. But of course, there are always young ones around. But that's what I'd look for the difference between those two. Okay, folks, there's so many questions, which is great to get. But if you join the course, you can pop some questions there as well, and I'll get around to answering those. I hope everybody's really enjoyed this. It's been great to get your questions, and I'm sorry I can't talk with all of you individually. That would be great. But I'm going to send you some more resources. You're going to get an email with a link to the free course, Kickstart Your Tree ID Skills. And tomorrow, there's going to be an announcement about something much bigger, as I've mentioned, the complete Tree ID course, which I'm very excited about. And I hope you'll join me on that journey too. And yeah, we've already started welcoming some of our students on the beta version of that course. So welcome to you guys too. But I hope you've really enjoyed it. And I hope you'll use these skills and hopefully some of this knowledge to get outside tomorrow and spot some of these features for yourself. Some of the ones from distance and some of them close up. Remember those 3 key principles. If you want to go back over them, join the course because they're all on there and you can watch it over and over again as many times as you want. If anybody has any tree questions or wants to know more about identifying trees in winter, drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you. I've really enjoyed this session and thanks very much for spending an hour with me, guys, and I hope you found it useful. And I look forward to seeing you on the free course, okay? Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.